Hello and welcome to Netskope SASE Week. My name is Mike Anderson. I'm the Chief Digital and Information Officer here at Netskope. I'm here today to talk to you about how you unlock the full financial and technical value of SASE. So let's jump right in. Now, the first thing I ask all my teams before we jump into technology is really ask three questions, and I call it the three whys. The first question is why change? Why do anything? What's the pain or what's the compelling event we have in our organization that's causing us to do something different? And if we decide we want to change, why is now the right time for us to take on that change? What are the benefits that we're going to get by taking on the change? Or if we don't do the change, what are the negative impacts that we may have in our organization? And since we're talking about SASE, why is SASE the right thing for us to do today? Why is it the right change for us to take on now inside our organizations? And so it's important for you to really be able to answer those three questions as you embark on this journey. So now that we've talked about the three whys, let's talk about the value pyramid. Now, this is a construct that's been around for quite some time. It was invented by Harvard Business School. And it really starts with how do we align what we're doing as an organization from the top level company strategy and objectives through the business initiatives that we're doing to put our strategy into action, to the critical capabilities that we need to have in order to be successful with that initiative and the strategy we're trying to accomplish, and the challenges that stand in our way that keep us from accomplishing the goals and objectives we have. And then ultimately, as we think about whatever the initiative is that we are doing, what are the value streams that align to that? What are the things that we can be doing from an IT standpoint? In this case, SASE, how does that help us accomplish our overall mission and objectives and strategy we have as an organization? So with the framing around the three whys and aligning that why to the strategy and the initiatives of our organization, now let's jump into some of the challenges that we see today with organizations that are embarking on this journey. So now that we have the framing around the three whys and we talked about the value pyramid and how those areas align, now let's talk a little bit about the challenges that we hear from companies today that are embarking on this journey. Now, the first thing we see is complexity rooted in a hardware-centric network security model. And sometimes we've expanded into software as a service-based tools, but the average organization has over 76 discrete tools today that they're using to protect users, data, and keep from being compromised by ransomware and breaches. On top of that, we hear a lot of people wanting to consolidate vendors so that they can find cost savings, whether it's direct savings from the consolidations of the vendor agreements themselves, or from the operational efficiencies they get from doing the same. We also know that 70% of the workforce will be hybrid in the future. And so how do we make sure that we create a seamless employee experience for people, whether they're working from home, in a coffee shop, or in one of our offices? We don't want them to have more access when they're at home than they have when they're in the office and vice versa. The other area we look at is the replacement of legacy VPN. Now, when users connect via VPN, they're connecting to our network. And when they have network access, that means that wherever that user has access, our attackers can have access as well. So if someone's working from home and they get compromised, now that person can go anywhere that user could have gone on the network. And if companies have flat networks, you can quickly see a security breach or malware spread across an entire organization in minutes. And so we want to reduce that attack surface. And so that's where we hear about zero trust architecture. You know, a lot of this came out from NIST as they put guidelines around what a zero trust architecture looks like. We saw it from the presidential memos that were sent out in 2021 and 2022 around adopting a zero trust architecture and a zero trust strategy. And it's really going back to how do we reduce the attack surface? How do we reduce the threats that exist because we have people that have access to the network? They have access to virtually every resource within our environment. And the other area we hear about is, the backhauling of traffic. It worked well when we were in offices and we could optimize the offices because we controlled them. We could optimize that to create a great employee experience. But when people are working from home, now I'm backhauling traffic from that person's home back through my corporate network and then out many times directly to the internet. In fact, we see that 70% of traffic from individual employees is actually going to a destination that's not within the four walls of the enterprise. And so backhauling traffic just to inspect and make sure that people are secure does not create a good employee experience, and it adds incremental costs because our networks are built based on throughput. And the more things we have running through those networks, the more cost it creates for and complexity it creates for our organizations. Now, there's a couple of other things that we see from our customers as well. One is we're seeing a lot of the threats in our environment today are being delivered by trusted cloud applications. In fact, we've seen a 24% increase just in the last 18 months. Attackers know that organizations allow OneDrive and Google Drive and Amazon AWS. And so they're using that as a way to get information out of organizations. Individual employees take data and upload it to their personal OneDrive or Dropbox or Box accounts. And so we want to make sure that the data that is sensitive to our organization isn't going places it shouldn't go. When we look at our teams, over 50% of the time that our teams have is being spent on what we call keep the lights on activity, the running of IT. And so all of these things, create a good momentum around adopting a secure access service edge architecture within our organizations. Let's jump into the secure access service edge architecture. So you're going to see this illustration many times during SASE week. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time here, but the one thing I will tell you is that when you look at all these different tools that are here today, so on the security service edge side, all the different discrete offerings that people use today to solve, really point security problems, as they converge, each one of these things is a speed bump that sits between our users and the destination that they're trying to access. We've also got a mix of hardware and software that was never meant to work together. Even if it's been assimilated under a single vendor logo or vendor brand, it doesn't mean it was meant to work together or integrate together. And so it doesn't give us the operational efficiency that we need and demand to be able to get the value we need in our organizations, and honestly, the simplification. Not to sound cliche, but when we think about anything with technology, it really boils down to people, process, and technology. And as we always say, building and buying technology is really the easiest part. The hard part is the change it puts on our teams. It's the change that our organizations have to go through to adopt and use that technology. And oftentimes when we think about IT tools or network security tools, we organize our teams around the tools, not necessarily around the capabilities that make sense, but around the tools that we purchase. And then on top of that, when we think about process, our processes have to change. Because again, our current processes were built to work within the technology landscape and with the solutions that we have within our environments today. And so while the technology, has a cost associated to it, the bigger lift that we have is getting our people to change and our processes to change to adapt to them. So let's jump into some of the technical challenges that we see today with some of our current environments. So the first thing we look at is when we have VPNs today or we're using proxies, how many of you have been traveling or you're working from home and all of a sudden you're getting news information from a different country? Especially if you're traveling in Europe and all of a sudden you're in Germany and you're getting languages delivered to you in English or Spanish, and you're scratching your head going, why is that happening? Well, that's a friction point. It's because the traffic is coming off of our network and it's picking up an IP address that's registered in a country that's different than the country the person's located in. And that creates friction for our users, and it creates help desk calls because people can't understand why they can't get news in local language and why their local banking website's not working. And that's friction for our organizations. The second thing we see is even when people use a proxy to inspect internet traffic and secure internet traffic, they often still backhaul because they need to pick up a dedicated IP range. And that's important because applications like Salesforce and Workday and others require a specific IP address to be dictated so that they know it's truly that company that's coming to the application, not just anybody off the street. And so that backhauling of traffic, for the reasons we've described before, create a suboptimal experience, and it also increases the cost and complexity of our network environments. The next one is really looking at the location of POPs. If you think about when we get onto the highway, how many feeder roads and how many side roads do we have to take before we get onto the highway that takes us to our destination? And so the location of where our users enter our network is extremely important, and where those networks leave our users off and where they leave that transaction off when it's getting to that application is also important. The next area is really that area I talked about before, which is the interoperability across the different vendors and suites of products. Again, these were tools that were built as individual discrete solutions that have been put together under an individual brand, but they still weren't made to work together. And so that creates challenges and complexity for our environment. We've also seen this we call agent sprawl, which is causing fatigue for our users and for our teams that support those people. Because every time we put an agent on our machine, it means we have to test that agent every time we upgrade operating systems, every time we buy a new piece of hardware, or say we bring a new Mac upgrade into our environment, we have to test every one of those agents to make sure that it doesn't break something. And when a user can't connect, how many different things do we have to troubleshoot to figure out what's causing the problem? And so this agent sprawl is really truly causing fatigue and complexity for our users and our organizations. And then last but not least, again, every tool we buy requires people that know the tool. They have to get the skills to be able to operate it. And when those people leave the organization, then a lot of times those tools flatline until we can have the next person come in and learn those tools. And so what we get with SASE is the ability to really consolidate and be able to train people on one set of tools that allow them to operate across the entire spectrum of everything in the network security landscape without learning different tools for each discrete individual service. So now I want to talk to you about why is proximity paramount to the user experience. And this really builds on the point we talked about before about where do our users get onto the network? Where are they entering and where does that traffic exit? And so it's important that when we think about who we partner with from a SASE standpoint, we think about what is their global footprint and how does that overlay to my organization, where my users are located, where my offices are located, where my factories are located. Because I want to make sure that I'm creating a great employee experience for all of my users around the world. And so as I transition to a SASE provider, it's important to ask the tough questions. Can you support dedicated IP ranges, or do I have to continue to backhaul traffic to my own network? Do you localize the content so people see things in their local language? They can get to the local banking websites. Do we offset the impact that we have on inspecting a transaction with the performance we get by the adjacencies we have with our network? And so these, along with many other questions, are things you need to ask because, again, proximity is paramount to the user experience. Because if people have a bad experience, they try to find ways to work around security. And so you can't trade off performance for security, and you can't trade off security for performance. They have to be in balance together. Now we'll talk about, we talked about zero trust before. So one of the things I tell you when we think about zero trust is zero trust policy. If you look at the zero trust architecture as prescribed to us by NIST, it basically is an enforcement point that sits between users and devices and all the destinations and resources they want to access. But you can't really enforce a zero trust policy without first understanding context. So you gain that context by really fully decrypting every transaction. Because if we look at the world we live in today, if we look at our traditional firewalls and our proxy architectures that exist today, they're really looking at, do I know who the user is? Do I know about the device? Is it a device I own? Is it a device that's owned by the employee? Do I trust the location the user is connecting from? Is it a trusted location? Do I trust the destination? Is it a known application or known website the person's going to? And if all those things are true, we just let the person in. But once they're in and they start the session, we no longer inspect that transaction in the way things are done today. But what we really need to do is to continue to decrypt and inspect every single transaction, because my trust for a user can change between going through that toll gate of, do I know the user? Do I know the device? Do I trust the location? Do I trust the destination? It can change once they're inside of an application. In fact, when we look in the software as a service world, there's different instances of applications. We have corporate OneDrive instances, we have personal OneDrive instances, we have corporate Google Drive instances, we have personal Google Drive instances. And you take that to over 70,000 different SaaS applications, you have a lot of complexity there. And so knowing that it's not just the trusted application, but it's your trusted application is important when you're thinking about zero trust policy. Then it's the activity being performed. If I'm a user that's always downloading the wrong things or has bad security hygiene, I may not want that person to download sensitive information. I may not want that person to upload sensitive information into an application. So how do we tailor in the behavior of the user and the security hygiene of that user into the activities they can perform? For example, I want to block downloads of data from Salesforce for salespeople that are leaving the organization, because I don't want them to take that information with them when they leave. I don't want my developers to check their source code, which they consider their own individual pieces of art, into their own GitHub repository when they leave an organization. No, I want that to stay in my enterprise environment. I want that to stay with my organization, because that's my intellectual property. And I also want to make sure I understand what data is being uploaded or downloaded so I can apply policies to that. And then ultimately, based on all that context, I take an action. It could be a block or allow, which honestly is a very basic level of maturity when it comes to a policy engine, but more advanced gets in, how do I coach people to take different decisions? How do I, based on where I sit with a SASE environment, how do I redirect people to where I want them to go? We get in a car today, we don't pull out the map to figure out where we're going. We pull out our phone, we put in an address, and it guides us through that GPS, around traffic and around the diversions that are going to take us off track to where we want to go. But yet, we take people and put them in front of a computer and they go all over the internet, and we expect them to remember everything that they got out of their annual or quarterly or monthly security awareness training, all knowing that people have to hear things 27 times before they remember. And so you need that GPS to sit between our users and those destinations, and that's part of the value, because we want to create great digital citizens. And just two key points to remind everyone of. 74% of data loss that we see today in organization goes to personal instances of trusted cloud applications. And so that could be, direct, someone that is intentionally doing that, or someone that just does it by mistake because they don't know better. And so what we want is people to be able to get their family photos off their work computer, but not upload all of our corporate sensitive information. And the other key point we see is that not only is data being lost to personal instances, but we see malware being delivered by trusted applications that we use day in and day out in our organizations today. So this is why context is important when we think about SASE, and why Zero Trust is a core component around policy decisions we make within a SASE environment. The next piece is we have a lot of investments we make as IT leaders. And it's important when we buy technologies that we have those pieces work together, and that 1 + 1 = 3. How do we truly make sure that the investments we have can build on top of one another, and having an open platform is key to that. So when you're thinking about a SASE provider and a company you're going to work with, make sure that you have someone with a platform that it's open. Because open platforms allow you to eliminate those point solutions, and they allow you to drive further consolidation and automation within your environments. So now, one of my favorite topics is, high impact use cases. Like, what is some value you can get in your organization? The first one is really, how do I discover and protect all that sensitive information that lives within my organization? And the challenge we have today is data is everywhere, and we have more processes and more sensors creating more data than we ever have before, and it's only getting greater by the day and by the moment. And so how do we discover that information and protect it to make sure it's not going places that we don't want it to go? We got to make sure also that we get into visibility, not just into, what are the SaaS applications that are being used in my environment and controlling of those, but also, if we think about our network teams, it's all about mean time to innocence, because we all know that anytime we have an issue, the first thing we do is say, well, it must be the network. And so network teams have to prove innocence. And so giving visibility to why is a user having a bad experience working from home is critical in this architecture to make sure we pick the right solution. Now, the biggest topic in every boardroom and company today is generative AI. On one side, we're saying if we block it, then we're blocking innovation, we're blocking new business models, we're blocking efficiency opportunities in our organization. But if we just let people use it at free will, then we potentially have sensitive information and intellectual property leaking into the greater public. And so what we want is like what we have inside Netskope today, using our own technology. We present our users an acceptable use policy in front of any generative AI, whether it's something they access through a browser or it comes through a plugin through one of our popular workplace applications. And then we inspect the data that's flowing between that user and that generative AI model to make sure that we're not having source code or sensitive information that's being uploaded into a public model. And at the same time, we start to take it further and look at, can I distinguish between a paid instance and a free instance? Because I have different policies around paid instances than I do around free instances. The next one is really that simplification and consolidation of all the edge infrastructure. And it's really around how do we optimize the user experience. We talked about real-time user coaching. One of my favorite phrases is we really want to create good digital citizens in our organizations. Digital citizens that don't click on bad links. They don't bring in applications when we've already got one that does that. But they're people that abide by our policies, but we don't just require them to remember it, but we make it real time. So real time coach our users to create the digital citizens we want and we expect within our organizations. And last but not least, it's stopping threats and ransomware. Because we all know that nothing stops revenue faster than not being able to ship product, to not be able to communicate with our customers. And so stopping threats and ransomware is critical when we think about our SASE provider. So I want to leave you with a couple of slides. You always get asked, like, Mike, what's the journey that you should go on when you think about moving to a SASE architecture and selecting a SASE provider? And I really break it into two parts. So if we remember, there was the security service edge piece, which is really that, how do I deliver all the security capabilities from a cloud standpoint? And then we had the WAN edge. So I'm going to start with SSE, or that security service edge. And really it's how do I integrate, what do I integrate with in my environment? What do I eliminate in my environment? And what do I reduce in my environment? And it could be choose your own adventure. I can start with my web and cloud applications, or I can start with private apps. And you can start with both of those equally. And then from there you go to the other that you didn't pick first. And then finally you expand into DLP, which is really getting DLP into your email and endpoint environments. And so that builds a three-phase journey for security service edge. Now, if we take a look at the WAN edge service side, again, we have that same conversation around how do we integrate, eliminate, and what do we reduce in our environments. And again, we have three phases here. And again, you can choose your own adventure. I recommend you start with your remote users, and how do you bring those WAN edge capabilities down to your users working from their endpoint machine or from their home office. And then move into your branch office environments. And then last but not least, move into your factories or manufacturing facilities we have around the world, because there's more nuance when we get into those environments. When we think about business value is really optimized by finding the right balance between agility, risk, and cost. So let's quickly touch on some of these areas. The first one is reducing risk. And so some of the ways that we see SASE helping us, first is it helps us improve the security and digital hygiene of our users. It allows us to prevent data leakage, that data loss to those trusted apps we use in our environments today. It allows us to reduce third-party risk, not just by consultants and contractors working in our organizations, but all of our extended suppliers we work with today. It also increases the security posture of our environments internally. And so a lot of our risk reduction falls into a bucket I call our gray dollars. So it's really that cost avoidance. It's not something you can sit down with your CFO and point to in your P&L and say, here's where the cost is coming out. It's the cost that's going to come up in the future if you don't take the right actions. It's the fines you're going to face if you don't do the things you're supposed to do from a regulatory standpoint. The next area is where I call the green dollars, which is really the optimization of cost. This comes through four real areas. The first one is that vendor consolidation. How do I simplify my landscape within my environment? How do I reduce the complexity, which ties right into the simplification of operations? Again, if I don't have as many tools in my environment, I may not need as many people operating those tools from a run standpoint, so I can get efficiency with the tools that I've implemented and redeploy my people towards higher value items that are more critical to my organization as you move forward. Things you need to build and things you need to instrument. I can eliminate technical debt in my environment. We hear technical debt used in a lot of different ways, but all those hardware and point products we have in our environment are technical debt, and each of those requires care and feeding. And last but not least, it's the insurance premiums. Everybody wants to get their insurance premiums down when it comes to cyber, and so by having the right security posture, having the right instrumentation allows you to do just that. And the last piece is really the agility piece, and I get asked all the time, Mike, help me understand, how does SASE help you with agility? Well, one is if my users are happy and they can do the work seamlessly and safely from anywhere, that drives better productivity. Because at the end of the day, I have people that want to come to work and just get their job done. And they want to do it safely. So reducing downtime, reducing friction has a direct impact on the productivity we have in our organization. If we want to have new business models, for example, when we think about managed services, if I can deploy a small piece of hardware so that, let's say, I want to put a clinic in the middle of a festival to give vaccines, I can allow myself to do that now without waiting on supply chain and without ordering equipment and waiting for circuits to be ordered. I can quickly deploy and support new business models. I can accelerate my time to value with mergers and acquisitions because I'm not, again, waiting on hardware to be delivered. I'm not deploying multiple agents on people's machines and hoping they know which one to use to connect to whatever resource they're trying to connect to. I can use it in the clean room to identify the risk I have in the company I'm acquiring, so it helps me accelerate and reduce risk in the M&A environment in our organizations. So I'm going to leave you with, we started with some of the themes that we hear from people today, so I want to talk to you about the outcomes that SASE delivers in our organizations. And I'm going to be very succinct. We get better visibility and control. We reduce the cost and complexity in our environments. We securely enable innovation so we can take advantage of things like generative AI in a safe and secure way. We allow for a secure and seamless employee experience so people have the same access and the same level of security whether they're working from home or in an office. We can reduce our attack surface so that the attackers can't take us down and keep us from generating revenue. And we can improve the speed and resilience in our organization. So I hope you gotten value from our conversation today, and I'm happy to have one-on-one conversations with anyone that'd like to learn more about how you unlock the full financial and technical value of SASE.